Okay, start.
Okay, good evening to our valued listeners. Welcome to the Africa iShare webinar. For the November series, as we've already stated, we are talking about post-pandemic economic recovery for Africa. And last week we introduced the topic, and we basically focused on the economic effects of the pandemic, and tried to identify the possible socioeconomic lessons that countries have learned so far as a result of the pandemic. Today, I have got, I would say, a new set of panelists, although Christine has been there since the series started. So before we get into today's discussion, I'm going to hand over to my panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we can kickstart the conversation. So I'll start with you, Kobian.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Kobia Biko, and I'm the CEO of Glow Group, which is based in Southern Africa and Eastern Africa. We are essentially a trading company with 7 subsidiaries, and we looking at increasing our business capacity going forward, especially after the post-pandemic. But my background in terms of academics, I've got background in journalism and law, as well as business management, as well as strategic planning. And I am also one of the major participants, and I don't want to say major, but I participate in the debates in African iShare, and has been on this discussion for quite a while. And I'm glad to be here to be able to participate in today's topic about post-pandemic economic recovery for Africa, so that we can see and discuss the ideas which are in the marketplace at the moment, and see how we can be able to negotiate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kobi. It's always a pleasure having you around. Christine, if you may introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chido, and good evening, everyone. My name is Christine. I have a background in law, and my area of practice is tax law, and it's great to be here. I appear frequently in these discussions. Chido, back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So today's conversation will have a specific bias towards, the small to medium enterprises in Africa, mainly because they constitute about 80% of all businesses that operate in Africa. And I would probably argue that they were the hardest hit by the pandemic. So I think maybe to just give a little bit of context in probably 2 minutes. As we stated earlier in last week's discussion that, well, when the pandemic started, it's not like, people expected it. And there was a lot of panic that was going on. And businesses really suffered in terms of, liquidity, having cash, and also having to reach their clients. Some of the problems emanated from the lockdown measures that countries had to put in place. There was an international shutdown that affected global value chains. And even local, I would say local businesses were not able to reach their clients because of the closures, the curfews, and the social distancing measures that had to be put in place. But over time, because this has been going on for a stretch of 2 years, people have business to reinvent themselves and come up with ways, mechanisms, and strategies to try and keep themselves afloat. We also then saw quite a number of financing schemes coming from, development banks, governments, to try and cushion businesses from the brunt of the pandemic. So today I'm going to open this discussion by picking your thoughts specifically on, the effects of the pandemic on businesses, particularly the micro, small to medium enterprises. And I will start with you, Kobe, because you also have got a background in business. So probably some of you, your response will be from a practical and personal perspective. What were the effects, or what are the effects that are still being felt from the pandemic? And I would really appreciate it if you possibly give us both the negative and the positive. Over to you, Kobe.
Well, thank you so much, the moderator. Well, as far as our company was concerned or is concerned, we have been in business for the time when the pandemic came. And when the pandemic came, in actual fact, we are almost unprepared of what we could experience, because it's been, as you said, about 2 years. And once the pandemic came and the government exercised the lockdowns, especially those harsh lockdowns which happened, there were a lot of things which happened in business at the same time, because the business as an entity is dealing with its own internal departments. There's, for example, human resource department. There is there's maybe the management component of it, the costings and the logistics and all those sort of things. So one of the things which happened quickly was that the logistics in terms of getting products from the source to the market was interrupted. And if any company like ourselves, where we source things from Vietnam or as far as field as Malaysia and China, there was a logistical nightmare trying to bring the products, because everything was slowed down and people could not move. And when people don't move, business don't move. The only leeway out of that was some businesses which are thought quite a few steps ahead of other businesses, and they digitalize their systems. We'll come to that later. But as far as the entity the business was concerned at that point, we experienced workers not coming to work, right? Because there's a lockdown, and there was social distancing, there was sanitizing, the people who are limited, how many could come and occupy the office space. Then it was like remote working, people could work from home. At that point, our business decided that we have to pinpoint key human resource personnel that the business could not do without, I should say. And that affected in terms, others in terms of employment, and in terms of looking at maybe lay them off, right? And not because of their will. These are people with families and the people with bills, and they have to make a living out of it. But then the businesses were left with no option than to offer those people packages if there was enough for that. And then at that point, we thought that this pandemic is coming for a short period of time. I remember thinking at the first time, because when I took over the reins of this company, I wanted just to introduce digital transformation strategies. That was my mandate, because I said, this is exactly what I want to do. I don't want to run a business as a going concern where it's just a general trader. We're doing the usual logistics, warehousing, distribution. I just want to digitalize the business in the mold of Amazon or Alibaba, or maybe take a lot of South Africa. And once the pandemic came, all those things could not be able to move at the pace at which we had developed our work plan. And then the expenses of the overheads in terms of rental, and payment of other things which the business has to pay to keep moving, we had to cut that down and negotiate with where we had rented with the landlords, such that they could give us some space, breathing space, to allow for the economy to open up a little bit. That did not happen as soon as everybody anticipated. Nobody knew. We thought it's 2 weeks. No, it will be about 2 months. No, I never knew that the mind of a business person was such that it could not be allowed to wait, because we business people don't even want to hear about holidays. We hate weekends, because we need to keep working and working. We need to see generating those revenues, and the numbers are adding up. So that was a huge challenge in terms of not knowing. We are in dark. We are groping in the dark. We didn't know when the lockdowns are going to be lifted, when the travel moratorium is going to be lifted, when the logistics are going to, to come back in full force again. So those were huge challenges at that point. But I guess the topmost of that was that we didn't know what is going to happen in the next maybe couple of weeks and a couple of months. It was a huge challenge for us. And for the small to medium enterprises, these were hit very hard. And it's good that you're mentioning statistics like 80% of, especially in Africa, where the small to medium enterprises constitute a huge, huge percentage of the businesses which exist, including, of course, the informal sector, although it's not, registered, and those people are not doing all, payment of taxation. They pay it in another way because they have to source products from some other places where taxation is paid. But then you look at maybe 80% plus. These companies like the SME and the medium enterprises, they were heavily affected because they provide much of the household incomes in Africa. And since the lockdown started coming, the government just shut down without any warning. You cannot move from this city to the other one. You cannot move from this province to the other one. I remember the people who were driving trucks, because I was in South Africa at that point, across the border to, Zimbabwe, across the border, Botswana, Eswatini, Namibia. They were required at that point to have a test, PCR test, to show that they don't have COVID. When you introduce that to truck drivers, you are cutting the flow of goods and services. At that point, people could not even move. Truck drivers, I remember in Botswana, the Botswana government said, no, truck drivers must prove they don't have COVID. We have also to bring our people to test these people to see if they have it or they just fake this. It was a huge crisis in terms of the goods which were flowing into that country, which in other words meant that the small to medium enterprises, to take a case study of Botswana, was that they could not be able to have the goods which they would in turn sell. At the same time, within the Botswana government itself, they have instituted the lockdown. It was 6 months at the very beginning, I remember. And that really affected the household income. So another thing which was a huge challenge, and when reading news, you find that the global north, they were able to give money to the businesses, the small to medium enterprise, even workers, employees. If you're earning a check, they would pay you even twice that amount to stay at home because they have the money, they have the resources, they are welfare states. In Africa, the opposite was true. The government don't have money to give to businesses. The government does not have money to give those people who lose their jobs. There's no compensation or welfare for anybody at all. So that was, in Africa, the crisis took a different significance because it was way, way massive, and the repercussions maybe will not be even seen at this point, but it will be seen down the line when it comes to maybe 1 year, 2 years from today, when people look back and see how many people lost their jobs, how many people lost their incomes, how many people lost their businesses, and how many people lost their living standards and livelihood, so to speak. So the challenges have been huge and massive for small to medium enterprises in Africa. I don't need to overstate that or emphasize that point. It is like this was something which descended right from hell. Now, when we factor in the government itself, because government has got its own inefficiencies, especially in terms of funding through development banks and even commercial banks give small loans, encourage the commercial banks to give loans or kind of support the small to medium enterprises. The governments were nowhere to be seen. I remember ourselves, we put up a case of wanting to get some compensation on behalf of even the employees, but up in South Africa, we didn't get a feedback, or all we got was an automated reply that they are looking at it and they're going to look at us when the time is appropriate. But we didn't, up to now, we've never gotten that. We're still living off what we are, small we are making and the little we are saved. So essentially what is happening is that it is a devastating landscape of business, destruction, if I can put it that way. But then again, the resilience of the African is there to be seen. And what is happening now is that people are coming back again. Businesses have started to reformulate themselves. And this is why you asked me to touch it a little bit on the recovery part. It's not just, all bad news all around. There are some things which I've noticed that businesses have, even ourselves, if I can tell you honestly, is that we're looking now for what we call smart partnerships. Now we have reached out to companies, not anymore like purchasing wherever there are services or commodities. We need to have a kind of smart partnership where we partner up with the company which is providing us services, and then we look at the way in which we can settle the bills in terms of the revenue sharing, the profit margins, and all that sort of thing. So out of this pandemic crisis, there is an economic recovery. It's just at the very tip end of the beginning of it, but it's happening. People, companies, and the small to medium, they have started innovating and having ways in which they can survive. It's as if they see another crisis coming in the next turn, and people, as business people, are very worried of that. In our situation as a company, as Glow Group, what we've done is to look at what we call digital transformation, which now we are trying to partner up with companies in America, partner up with companies in in Middle East, and that sort of thing. Smart partnership is part of innovation which has been brought about by the pandemic. And then again, another option which I have seen companies, I talked to a few people in management, in the different companies, they are talking about what we call increasing income streams for the companies. So if you're caught out doing one dimensional business, for example, you've been selling energy drinks. You don't want to be, found doing that at this point in time in 2022, 2020. No, you want to do energy drinks, yes, but also you want to introduce, soft drinks. You want to introduce maybe caddy, like chocolates. You want to introduce other income streams. There's one company which I know that was a few steps ahead of others. It has got 5 income streams. One of that was air travel, right? And when air travel died, if the other stream, the other 4 streams came on board, kind of to support and act as a pillar for that business. Now, any company which was selling air travel at that time, just air travel only, really suffered a lot because everything was shut down. So the people went home. I remember in Namibia, I went to one company which sells air ticket. And I asked the people who used to sell air ticket, where is so and so? Where they told me, those people are no longer working. And the people who are there are just about a couple. Before, they were about maybe you can see about 15 people in an open space. Now there are about 4 or 5 who are selling air tickets at the moment. So you can see the repercussions of this. But at the same time, they did not shut down. They are innovating again. A travel is coming back again. Delta Airlines said they have registered about 600% increment in terms of bookings. So companies are coming up again. And the way in which they're coming up is through innovation, digital transformation, increasing income streams for themselves, as well as smart partnerships. This is this is the solutions to what is being offered now, and the companies which are, savvy enough to be able to act upon what the pandemic has taught them are looking at this area so that they can mitigate and adapt a new way in which they will not be caught again in the end lamps, if so to speak, in terms of what happened during the pandemic. So there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel at the moment.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kobe, for such a detailed response. There are quite a lot of things that I picked up from your submissions that I will probably get back to you on. And I just wanted to say that you are so, your company actually took a very good stance to try and, get into smart partnerships and focus on digital transformation. Because I remember very well that, so many conferences that have been held, so many papers that have been written in respect of small and medium enterprises. There's always been this idea that, you know what, COVID, in as much as it's ills, it has also brought about the issue of digital transformation, and those companies that are able to actually latch onto the opportunity to do better, not only for post-COVID economic recovery, but even in the future of in light of future pandemics, if any. And I just wanted to also echo what you said in respect of the bureaucracies that were brought about by the pandemic, especially the COVID-19 containment measures, when you made reference to the issue of truck drivers in, Botswana and all these other places. I remember actually doing a study on intra-tripartite trade relations, basically trade relations between the East African Community, COMESA, and SADC during the COVID-19 pandemic. And countries like Zambia, Mozambique, Malawi, they were so hard in terms of their approach to truck drivers and allowing cargo to pass through their borders, which affected obviously the delivery of very important, like what we PPEs, and also it really had a huge effect on trade statistics from the region. So obviously that was going to have a ripple effect on businesses, because the cargo that passes through borders, they are not really for the government, but it is actually businesses that trade with one another. So thank you for saying that. Christine, I'm going to pick your mind in respect of you are the tax practitioner, and I would assume that you would probably want to share with us the effects of the pandemic from a tax perspective. I'm coming from this angle that you have governments like South Africa that had to come up with stimulus packages and also, various incentives to try and cushion businesses. And some of the incentive was actually from the Revenue Authority, where they were delaying tax payments and doing all those other things. So they really tweaked the taxing system. And as a tax practitioner, how did you feel about it? How does it make you feel? I would assume that the pandemic had an effect on, tax returns and the revenue that governments tend to get from taxes. Maybe if you could comment more on that, Christian.
Okay, Chido, thanks for that question. And yes, indeed, there are different packages across different African countries that were given to taxpayers who are also business people, but also individuals to help them with the COVID pandemic. And some of the things we found in most African countries, it was either that you get into a payment plan where maybe you're allowed to delay your payments of tax, because of course there's a timeline within which you should pay the tax, and then it comes to the point where you haven't been trading and now you can't even afford to pay the tax. So you're allowed to like come up with a plan on how you're going to remit it. But then also a common thing that happened was, which was supposed also to help like everyone in the country, was like for countries that charge value added tax, which is the goods and sales tax. So there was a reduction in the rate, because that's the tax that directly hits your consumption. So that if I go buy a bottle of water from the shop, then and the shop is registered to collect VAT, then they would charge me a certain percentage. So that directly was affecting, like the purchasing power of both businesses and also individuals across the country. So that was a common thing that happened, where the value-added tax rate was reduced, and also like for employment taxes, there was like a reduction in the like the employment taxes that will be deducted, especially those who apply like the advance payment system, which is a sort of like you pay as you earn. So, Chido, yes, so there are different measures, and considering that the government in most businesses, which Kobia could attest to, takes a big slice of the pie from businesses in terms of tax. So, and it's many of them. I mean, there's a levy or a tax in any direction that you look at from a business. So, if it's not corporate tax, which is your business tax, like on the profits that you're making, then you're also being taxed for consumption of maybe any goods that you're consuming within the business and you're not outputting any product. So for VAT, you'll be charged that or goods and sales tax, and then you'll be charged various other administration taxes. So it was a good avenue for government to give relief. But then what has happened is that most of the reliefs have come to an end for most countries. So as at maybe 2021 beginning or mid 2021, most of them had been clawed back. So you find like right now, the tax system has reverted for most countries. And you see, for also governments now, the thing is that because taxes are will be collected maybe to meet the loan obligations of the country. So also now what had happened is that the amount of money that was going to the government was reduced because of the reliefs that were given. So now the governments are so quick to go back and collect these taxes so that maybe you have loans from IMF or whichever other country has given you a loan and you need to pay it. So now you found yourself in a situation where you're also trying to rearrange your debt as a country. So it had that kind of ripple effect. But I think a lot could be learned from that. What especially on the tax reliefs, because it got to a point where you realized so like for countries that are very high value added taxes or goods and sales tax, which across Africa they range even to 18%. Imagine for everything that you're buying, it could go as high as 18%. Like for Kenya, 16% went down to 14% during the pandemic. So you realize, so you mean governments can actually reduce this value-added tax, and then they try and plan work around how the money is spent, and also for the other taxes that were reduced. So I think it was an eye opener to just realize that if the governments really wanted to give a bit more of reliefs to the businesses and also to like individuals, then that might have been possible. Chido, that's all I'll say on that.
Thank you so much, Christian, for your response. And you're right to say that it was actually an eye opener. And I would really imagine, honestly, how governments must have felt trying to come up with those tax incentives, because they're constantly, crying about how businesses generally don't pay taxes, especially in Africa. But I'm going to ask Kokelo to briefly introduce himself, and then after that, maybe he can share his insights briefly on particularly how businesses have been responding to the pandemic from his understanding.
Thank you very much, Chido. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you well. Thank you.
All right. My name is Isanda Kokelo. I'm an accountant by profession. My view on how businesses have been responding to the pandemic, I would say I've seen quite a number of strategies that different businesses have been applying to adapt to this new environment or the new normal that we find ourselves in now. And I feel like Kobia sort of touched on most of this. Like for instance, I came across a business. It's a hotel, sort of like a resort in Lake Victoria. So I visited the owner. When we went there, the owner was giving us, a brief on how they have been able to survive throughout the COVID period. And she was like, what saved her from closing down or collapsing was that they really zeroed in on the local Kenyan market rather than depending on the diaspora or visitors from outside. So that way they were booked almost all the time. So I'll say, being adaptable, looking at, okay, we are where we are, what do we do? What market do we have at this point in time? Because the other thing I find with this sort of pandemics is that the government sort of controls everything, and businesses are left to respond to what government has to say. So government will put out policies and say, restaurants will be closed or bars will be closed. If you are a bar owner, what do? You have to comply. So it's really difficult to say what can businesses do without looking at what governments can do. But because we have to say what businesses will do, I mean, it's kind of like a chicken and egg scenario. So the other thing I have observed, which I've seen with like businesses in Bermuda, is that they work hand in hand with the government. So they'll have a lobbyist telling the government, you have to do this. We are going to comply to these regulations, but you also need to relax this and that, so that we can also make some, money out of whatever is happening, so that people don't go home. Or so businesses need to start talking to governments, so that whenever governments are coming up with policies or rules to respond to different, pandemics or whatever it is, they can also factor in the views of the business community. And that way, we don't have people suffering too much because of draconian government regulations. The other, maybe the last thing I'll say is that there are businesses that, they have managed to sort of evolve totally, like Kobia was saying, open up different revenue streams, or totally move out of a certain segment to a different segment. So that also helps. So businesses should be able, but the ability of businesses to also be able to do that depends on how ready they are for that. So I guess going forward, people need to learn that we'll not have things running as normal forever. There are people who close when, in March last year, when they announced COVID was here, some people knew in 2 weeks this thing will be done and we'll be back to normal. But some businesses that had cash reserves and, were prepared, they were better able to respond. So I guess going forward, as a business person, whatever business you're doing, just know that there could be uncertainties that you are not aware of today. How are you going to respond to those? Depends on how prepared you are with, cash or whatever resources that you have to cushion yourself. Yeah, so that's those are my thoughts on the subject for now.
Thank you so much, Kokelo, and it's great to have you here. Or I'll call you Isanda. Wow, I didn't want to butcher your name. So back to you, Kobe. I would understand that you probably had quite a lot of contractual obligations that were sort of disturbed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Maybe if you could briefly speak on generally how how businesses have been trying to deal with contractual clauses and obligations that were probably not performance was no longer possible because of the pandemic.
Thank you once again. Contractual obligations of businesses, usually the part which we experienced was the part of office renting, right? And at the time when the lockdown came, which was lockdown level 5 in South Africa, it was so devastating to businesses that the government itself came out and said, well, you got to put a moratorium on rental fees, not only for businesses, but also even for residential purposes. And I remember that time the the realtor, the one who we pay rent to, was adamant that we should keep paying the rental fees. They reduced it by a factor of about 25%, which meant that we have to pay 75%, which we continued paying. And then we brought the letter from the government itself saying that no, there should be absolute postponement because nobody's coming to the office. The people who are coming to the office are the issue people. Yeah, I mean, what I mean by issue people is like the necessary staff were coming to the office. So let's say we were like 17, and the people who come to the office would be in the region of about 6, right? Because the other 11, we deem them the cleaners and the people who come and make tea and so on. They could not be able to come because there's no point of them coming. You just maybe increase the probability of transmission of the virus. And that contractual obligation led us to have to negotiate that agreement with the landlord. And finally, they were able to understand using the government, directive that they have to postpone that because we told the people, you start working from home because we're just doing logistics and all that and that sort of thing. The people who were supposed to be receiving goods and then going forward and selling them, they were nowhere to be seen because they were not coming. So our warehouse ended up being kind of, quiet. The office went quiet. And the realtor wants to be paid. The government stepped in just as, Mr. O'Keller has pointed out about the hotel situation. People, you have to use the local, but then the locals could not just travel in South Africa. So I remember a situation where a game lodge owner in Kruger Park, the owner of the game lodge was the one doing the cleaning and making beds because there are no people. The cleaners are gone, everybody's gone, nobody's coming there. The tourists are not coming. So it was kind of like these contractual obligations which we had to negotiate again and downwards until they reached a point where now we reached it leveled up. We have to pay this, and it was good for them, it was good for us. That is how it was. When we come to loans, to the banks, in South Africa, the banks, I think Christine touched on that when talking about taxation. One of the advantages of doing business in South Africa is that South Africa is quite an industrial. In industry is quite a developed economy as compared to any other African country, and it has got good infrastructure. Actually, if you're doing business and you are based in a country like let's say Zambia, for example, okay, like Angola, Burundi, then you will have a problem even if you brought stuff and you wanted to sell them like business commodities and goods. You cannot really be able to transport them because of poor infrastructure. But South Africa is good. Now, when it came to the government trying not getting tax from the SARS, South African Revenue Services, they kind of also said, no, we are not going to, you don't have to file for your taxation, which was quite something which is a breathing space for companies. And they at the same time offered to give businesses money, which of course, they did, but not everybody received, including ourselves, because Africa, the situation the way it is in terms of government says it's going to do this, and then people decide that these ones are going to receive, these are not going to receive, or you wait for your turn. But altogether, South Africa has a very positive approach toward the business environment, like rental obligations, loans. The government said don't ask for loans to be repaid at all. Maybe the interest on the loan, yes, could be paid if the company can afford. If it cannot afford, it has to write and say you cannot be able to pay interest on those loans. May they be from the development bank, may they be from commercial banks, may they be from any financial institution. So there was a positive on that side in terms of the government stepping in to kind of help out the businesses so that the business can survive and look forward to a brighter day in future. And this has been going on and on for quite some time in South Africa. And since now the economy is picking up, I think someone mentioned about the municipal elections which were there, where internally the country was open and citizens could meet. I remember attending one of the meetings for DA right in the center of Johannesburg. I was just passing by, I saw a lot of blue. So they let me see what's going on here. So I stopped, I loitered around and took a few pictures with the DA. I think president was there speaking and talking about all that kind of, but then the social distancing was there, masking was there, and everything was into police, the security, everything was going on very, very well. So in terms of the contractual obligations of the government of South Africa at that point, businesses they are not very happy. Businesses are not, they are not obliged to be 100% happy all the time because they want the economy to open. But then again, there's a law. Also, the business community, the National Chamber of Commerce, put up a case to the government and say, no, you got to open the economy because there's no enough evidence for this and that. So there's a lot of, because South Africa is a very strong constitutional order. So obviously, any segment which is aggrieved can take the government to court and open up proceedings against the government, putting pressure on the government to open up those spaces for business. So in one way, I can say my experience being in South Africa at that time, that the government of South Africa was proactive, that the government was willing to, help the businesses as far as possible in their contractual obligations. It was also willing to help the residents in contractual because of this pandemic situation. Because if you're a small and medium enterprise and you're paying rent and you are not be able to make a business, how are you going to pay your landlord? Then that will be difficult. But I know very well that many people were helped by the government, and the police were there to make sure that the law enforcement was there to ensure that nobody was violated in terms of being asked to pay when they don't have to pay. And that was a positive, a huge positive in the side of the government. The last point I want to make is to say that Okello pointed at something between government business access, that kind of access, supposed to be taken care by the National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It was not very proactive in South Africa, although, of course, they tried to do this and that. But what I wanted to, the upshot of this is to say that next, as we move forward, post-COVID economic recovery, we need to remember that the business community and the government need to find a new formula to work together such that anything which comes of this nature, of COVID nature, should be able to be sorted out and not cause so much pain as it has happened during this period of last 20 months or 2 years or so. That's my observation on that.
Thank you so much, Kobia. Christine, maybe if you could speak again on contractual clauses and obligation, but maybe from your experience as a lawyer and having to advise your clients on that, realizing that we're almost running out of time and this is a series you obviously continue next week, maybe you might want to also then summarize your thoughts for this week only.
Okay, thanks, Chido. And I think on that, there's a lot, like, for instance, what has been mentioned here is like employees. So what the contractual obligations that you have within a business were affected. Like employees, now you have to send them home for a period of time, whether with pay or without pay. And the employment laws do not, ideally, don't take into account a situation where a business is not just terminating an employee, you're just sending them on almost leave, and it's possibly unpaid leave because you as a business, you're not able to meet your financial obligations, you're not even able to make any money, you're not trading. And then in that scenario, what happens? And then there's like the renegotiation of contracts, like Kobia was saying. So there was that, and a lot of people are relying on the act of God clause, that is normally no contracts, that something is beyond your control. And then, but then how much was that? That was actually largely used But then again, it couldn't have cautioned some of the contractual obligations that you had, which not you didn't want to terminate necessarily. You just needed possibly to postpone or come up with a different arrangement. And a common thing that I actually noticed was that you see, like for insurance companies, because people had taken different covers with insurance companies, and insurance companies being what they are is that you must be specifically covered for a specific risk for them to take it up. So you find like for most people, whether it was like from the medical cover, insurance companies were quick to say that we've covered all diseases other than COVID, because you see, everyone was very unaware of how much this was going to last and what was going to be the possible effects of like such a taking up such a medical cover for your employees. So again, you did not want to terminate the medical covers with the insurance companies. You possibly just needed to renegotiate them. So, there's quite a bit of different aspects from a business perspective and a contractual perspective that came up. And I think for that season, lawyers were very busy trying to negotiate this thing. Chido, that's my thought. Those are my thoughts for now.
Okay, thank you so much. And you're right to say that, there were quite a lot of cases that came up in respect of frustration of contracts and also the force majeure clause. And I know for a fact that in South Africa, there has been quite a number of cases that have been brought up to the level of the High Court in respect of insurance companies not being able to pay out insurances for businesses that have failed to pick up as a result of COVID in terms of their insurance policies on the basis of so many other reasons. And courts have been taking, quite a different, I would say a diverse stance or approach to that in respect of how they get to the judgment in dealing with contractual clauses and obligations that have been affected by the pandemic. So I see that the other panelists have left. So I will probably close by saying that we welcome any comments, questions, and say whatever that you have to say to keep the conversation going until we meet again next Thursday, to pick up on this topic, which is going to be running until the end of November. So goodbye for now and have a great evening.